Young pilot Guy saved a beautiful CEO from a plane crash on a deserted island. Days later, love found them. The sleek private jet sat on the tarmac, gleaming under the midday sun. Inside, Guy adjusted his headset and ran through the pre-flight checklist with practiced precision. He was young but confident, a rising star in the world of aviation. Flying was more than a job for him, it was his passion. "Ready when you are, Captain," his co-pilot chimed in. Guy nodded, glancing toward the cabin where their sole passenger, Marissa Blake, had just boarded. Even without looking directly at her, he could feel her presence, a forceful energy that filled the space. Marissa was a renowned CEO, celebrated for her sharp intellect and unwavering determination, but her reputation for being demanding preceded her. "Just keep things smooth," Guy muttered under his breath as he adjusted the controls. Behind the cockpit door, Marissa sank into one of the plush leather seats, her tablet already in hand. Her expression was sharp, her fingers flying across the screen as she answered emails. "This whole thing is ridiculous," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "Why do I need to waste my time at some charity gala when I could be finalizing the merger?" Her assistant, seated across from her, offered a timid smile. "It's important for PR Mins, Blake," the board thought. "I don't care what the board thought," Marissa snapped, her tone cutting. "This is my company, and my time is too valuable for photo ops and handshakes." Guy overheard fragments of the conversation as he ran final checks, his jaw tightened. Typical VIP, he thought, shaking his head. He'd dealt with passengers like her before, people who saw others as little more than tools or obstacles. Still, he reminded himself, professionalism came first. The plane taxied smoothly onto the runway and took off without a hitch. As they ascended, Guy's focus shifted entirely to the sky. But as they leveled off at cruising altitude, his attention was drawn to a blinking light on the instrument panel. "Strange," he murmured, leaning closer. "What's up?" his co-pilot asked. "Just a small anomaly," Guy replied, frowning. He toggled a switch and checked the radar. His heart sank. "Storm system ahead," he said, his tone clipped. "Looks like it's forming faster than expected." He toggled the intercom. "Miss Blake, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered some unexpected weather patterns. It may get bumpy, so I'd recommend you stay seated and fasten your seatbelt." Marissa's voice came back, terse and distracted. "Noted. Just get me there on time." Guy sighed. Of course she doesn't care. But his instincts told him something wasn't right. The storm was intensifying at an alarming rate, and the turbulence began to ripple through the aircraft. In the cabin, Marissa barely looked up from her laptop as the plane shuddered. Her assistant clung nervously to the armrests, glancing toward the cockpit door. "Shouldn't we be worried?" the assistant whispered. "Not unless the captain tells us to be," Marissa said curtly. "Just focus on the press brief." But the turbulence grew worse. Overhead compartments rattled, and the lights flickered. "Mayday! Mayday!" Guy's voice crackled over the intercom, snapping Marissa out of her work. "We've lost engine power. Preparing for emergency landing." "What?" Marissa exclaimed, her laptop sliding off the table as the plane lurched violently. In the cockpit, Guy's hands moved with precision and speed, his calm exterior masking the adrenaline coursing through him. He glanced at his co-pilot, who was pale but focused. "We're going down," Guy said grimly. "Brace for impact." As the plane plummeted, the sound of rushing wind and warning alarms filled the cabin. Marissa clung to her seat, her heart racing as fear took hold. For the first time in years, she felt completely powerless. Through sheer skill and determination, Guy managed to guide the crippled plane toward a small clearing on an uncharted island. The landing was rough, the impact jarring enough to knock Marissa and her assistant against their restraints. The plane skidded to a halt, its nose buried in the sand and smoke billowing from the damaged engines. For a moment, there was silence. Then Guy's voice rang out, hoarse but steady. "Is everyone okay?" The aftermath of the crash was chaotic, and in the immediate scramble for survival, he realized the co-pilot and Marissa's assistant were lifeless near the mangled fuselage, their injuries too severe to survive. Marissa unbuckled her seatbelt with trembling hands, her chest heaving as she looked around the cabin. I think so," she said, her voice shaky. Guy emerged from the cockpit, his uniform rumpled and his face smudged with dirt. His gaze swept over Marissa, briefly assessing her condition. With a heavy heart, Guy and Marissa dug shallow graves in the soft sand, marking each with driftwood crosses. They stood there for a moment, murmuring a quiet prayer. "It's just us now," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of loss. "We're alive," he said simply, his tone both relieved and serious. "But we're stuck." Marissa stared at him, her CEO composure cracking under the weight of the situation. "Stuck? What do you mean stuck?" "I mean," Guy said, gesturing to the wreckage and the dense jungle beyond, "we're on a deserted island in the middle of nowhere. The radio's fried, the plane's totaled, and no one knows we're here." Marissa's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Guy, then at the wreckage around her, and realized the truth of his words. This wasn't just a delay. This was survival. The first morning on the island was harsh and unforgiving. Marissa woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the distant cries of seagulls. She blinked against the glaring sunlight, her body aching from the rough landing. Around her, remnants of the plane were scattered, and the realization of their situation hit her like a wave. Guy was already up. He stood a few feet away, studying the horizon with a determined expression. His uniform shirt was torn, his face streaked with dirt, but he seemed unfazed. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," he said when he noticed her stirring. Marissa groaned, sitting up and brushing sand off her pants. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "Do you have any idea how long it's going to take for someone to find us?" Guy turned to her, his expression calm but serious. "It's hard to say. We're way off course, and the radio was completely fried in the crash. Until someone comes looking, and that could take days or even weeks, we need to focus on surviving." "Surviving?" Marissa echoed, her tone incredulous. "I'm not a castaway, Guy. I run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I have meetings, deadlines." "Well," Guy interrupted, "unless you can conference call a coconut, those deadlines will have to wait." Marissa shot him a glare, but Guy was already moving. "Stay here. I'm going to scout the area, see if there's fresh water nearby." By midday, Guy had returned with a handful of coconuts and a plan. "There's a small stream a few hundred yards that way," he said, pointing toward the dense jungle. "It's fresh water. We'll need to build something to collect it, but it's a start." Marissa wrinkled her nose. "You expect me to drink from a stream? What about bottled water? Surely there's something left in the wreckage." Guy sighed, his patience thinning. "Most of the supplies burned in the crash. Whatever's left won't last us more than a day or two. This is our best option." Marissa crossed her arms. "You seem to know a lot about this. Do you moonlight as a survivalist or something?" "I was a scout growing up," Guy said simply, "and I've been trained for emergencies like this. It's part of being a pilot." "Well, good for you," Marissa muttered, sinking onto a piece of driftwood. Guy studied her for a moment, his frustration growing. She was clearly out of her depth, used to luxury, control, and solutions at her fingertips. But here, none of that mattered. "Look," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I get that this isn't the life you're used to. But out here, we're equals. If we're going to survive, we both need to pitch in. So, are you with me or not?" Marissa stared at him, her pride battling with the reality of their situation. Finally, she exhaled and nodded. "Fine. What do you need me to do?" Over the next few hours, Guy showed Marissa how to crack open coconuts for water, weave palm fronds for a makeshift shelter, and start a fire using scraps of metal from the wreckage. It wasn't easy. Marissa struggled with tasks that seemed second nature to Guy, and her frustration often boiled over. "This is ridiculous," she snapped after her fifth failed attempt to spark a fire. "Why do I even need to learn this? Isn't this your job?" "My job," Guy said evenly, "was to get you to your destination safely. Since the plane is out of commission, I'm improvising. And so are you." Marissa threw the sticks down, glaring at him. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me fail?" Guy's jaw tightened. "No, I'm not. But I am trying to keep us alive, which would be a hell of a lot easier if you stopped fighting me at every turn." They stared at each other for a tense moment before Marissa looked away, her shoulders sagging. "This is just not what I'm built for," she admitted, her voice quieter. Guy softened slightly. "No one's built for this, Marissa. You adapt, or you don't make it. That's how it works." By evening, they had managed to build a small shelter and start a fire. As the flames crackled, casting flickering light across the beach, Marissa sat beside Guy, her exhaustion evident. "I guess I should thank you," she said grudgingly. Guy smirked. "Don't strain yourself." She gave him a sideways glance but couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at her lips. Despite her initial irritation with him, Marissa had to admit that Guy's resourcefulness was impressive. As she leaned back against the driftwood, the reality of their situation settled over her again. They were alone, isolated, with no guarantee of rescue. But for now, at least, they had each other, and a fire to keep the darkness at bay. The storm hit with a ferocity neither of them had expected. It started with a low rumble of thunder in the distance, but within an hour, the sky had turned an angry gray, and sheets of rain pounded the island. The wind tore through their makeshift shelter, scattering palm fronds and sending their few belongings tumbling across the beach. "Get down," Guy shouted over the roar of the wind, grabbing Marissa's arm and pulling her under what little cover remained. The two of them huddled together, drenched and shivering, as the storm raged around them. The once calm ocean now churned violently, waves crashing against the shore with deafening force. "This isn't going to hold," Guy yelled, his voice barely audible over the storm. "What do we do?" Marissa shouted back, her voice trembling. "We need to find higher ground," Guy said, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He pointed toward a cluster of trees farther inland. "There, let's go." By the time they reached the grove, the storm had grown even worse. Guy worked quickly, lashing together branches and fronds to create a temporary shelter under the trees. Marissa stood nearby, clutching her arms as the rain soaked through her clothes. "Here," Guy said, handing her a larger branch. "Help me hold this in place." Marissa hesitated, her hands shaking, but she took the branch and did her best to follow his instructions. Together they managed to construct a crude lean-to that offered some protection from the relentless rain. As they sat beneath it, catching their breath, Marissa looked at Guy, her face pale but determined. "How do you even know how to do all this?" "Like I said before," Guy replied, his tone calm despite the situation, "training and practice. You learn a lot when you're responsible for keeping people safe." Marissa nodded, her usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion. "Well, thank you for keeping me safe." Guy gave her a faint smile. "We're not out of the woods yet, literally." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the island a sodden mess. Their original shelter was gone, swept away by the wind and rain. Guy wasted no time setting to work on building a new one. "This time we're going higher up," he explained, gesturing to a rocky incline that overlooked the beach. "It'll be safer if another storm comes through." Marissa followed him, her steps hesitant but willing. For the next few hours, Guy taught Marissa how to weave palm fronds for roofing, secure branches for stability, and even fashion a makeshift gutter to collect rainwater. "Why not just rely on the stream?" Marissa asked as she struggled with the fronds. "Because it might dry up," Guy replied. "You always need a backup plan." Marissa nodded, silently admiring his practicality. Despite the sweat and dirt, Guy worked with a quiet confidence that was both reassuring and humbling. That afternoon they ventured into the jungle to gather food. Guy showed Marissa how to identify edible plants and crack open coconuts for sustenance. "Here, try this," he said, handing her a piece of fruit he'd sliced open with his pocket knife. Marissa eyed it warily. "Are you sure it's safe?" "I've eaten it before," Guy assured her. Reluctantly, Marissa took a bite. To her surprise, it was sweet and refreshing. "Not bad," she admitted. "See? You're a natural," Guy teased, his grin making Marissa chuckle despite herself. As they made their way back to the shelter, Marissa slipped on a moss-covered rock and fell with a yelp. She landed hard, her leg wedged awkwardly in a narrow crevice. "Marissa," Guy called, rushing to her side. I can't move," Marissa said, her voice trembling with pain. Guy crouched beside her, assessing the situation. The crevice was deep, and her leg was pinned by a jagged rock. "Okay, stay still," he said calmly. "I'm going to get you out." Using all his strength, Guy pried the rock loose and carefully freed Marissa's leg. She winced as he helped her up, leaning heavily on him for support. "Can you walk?" he asked, his tone gentle but concerned. "I think so," Marissa said, though her voice was shaky. Guy wrapped an arm around her waist, guiding her back to the shelter. Once they were safely inside, he examined her leg more closely. "It's just a sprain," he said after a moment. "You'll be okay, but you need to rest." Marissa nodded, her usual composure giving way to vulnerability. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Guy asked, genuinely puzzled. "For saving me," Marissa replied, meeting his gaze. Again. Guy gave her a small smile. "It's what I do." But as he turned away to tend the fire, Marissa watched him with a newfound sense of appreciation. For the first time, she saw him not just as a pilot or a survivalist, but as someone deeply brave and selfless. And for the first time, Marissa felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: gratitude, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the sand, its warmth a welcome reprieve from the cool night air. Marissa sat cross-legged beside it, staring into the flames as if they held the answers to questions she couldn't voice. Guy sat across from her, his hands busy whittling a stick with his pocket knife, though his attention was only half on the task. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. After a while, Marissa broke it. "Do you think anyone's looking for us?" she asked, her voice quiet. Guy looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Probably," he said. "But the storm threw us so far off course that it might take them a while to figure out where to look." Marissa nodded, her shoulders sagging slightly. "It's just hard not knowing." "I get it," Guy said, setting the stick aside. "But we've got a good setup here. We're surviving. That's what matters right now." Marissa let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Surviving," she repeated. "I've spent my entire life trying to do more than just survive. Always pushing, always achieving. And now I'm here, struggling to start a fire or open a coconut." Guy leaned back, studying her. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" Marissa hesitated, the question catching her off guard. "Because I have to," she said finally. "People expect it from me. My board, my employees, my family, they all think I have everything figured out, that I'm invincible. If I let them see me struggle, it feels like I'm letting them down." She looked at Guy, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do you know what it's like to have everyone depend on you? To feel like you can't afford to fail?" Guy didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Yeah," he said softly. "I do." Marissa tilted her head, surprised. "You do?" Guy nodded, his gaze distant. "When I was 15, my parents died in a car accident. It was just me and my younger sister after that. I had to grow up fast, make sure she was fed, get her through school, keep things together." Marissa's expression softened. "That must have been overwhelming." "It was," Guy admitted. "But it also gave me a purpose. I wanted to show her that we could make it, no matter how hard things got. I worked odd jobs, saved every penny, and eventually put myself through flight school. Becoming a pilot was my dream, but more than that, it was a way to prove that we could overcome anything." He paused, his eyes meeting Marissa's. "So yeah, I know what it's like to feel like the world's on your shoulders. But I also learned that it's okay to lean on people sometimes. You don't have to do it all alone." Marissa looked down, her fingers tracing patterns in the sand. "That's easy for you to say," she murmured. "People respect you. They see you as capable. With me, it's different. The moment I show weakness, they'll pounce." "Maybe," Guy said. "Or maybe they'll see that you're human." She laughed bitterly. "I doubt it." Guy leaned closer, his voice firm but kind. "Marissa, you've been through hell these past few days, and you're still standing. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. But strength isn't just about being tough all the time. Sometimes it's about being real." Marissa blinked, his words striking a chord she hadn't expected. For so long she had buried her vulnerability beneath layers of control and confidence, convinced it was the only way to survive in her world. But here, on this island, with nothing to shield her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. "You're the first person who's ever said that to me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Guy smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'm glad we ended up here." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Marissa found herself studying Guy, his steady hands, his calm demeanor, the way he seemed to carry himself with an unshakable sense of purpose. "You're a good man, Guy," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "No," Marissa said, shaking her head. "It's more than that. You could have given up on me a dozen times, but you didn't. You've been patient, kind, even when I didn't deserve it." Guy shrugged, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Guess I don't know how to quit." For the first time in what felt like forever, Marissa smiled, genuinely, warmly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not letting me fall apart." As the night deepened and the fire burned lower, they stayed there, talking about their lives, their dreams, and the paths that had led them to this unlikely place. And as Marissa drifted off to sleep under the stars, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Guy watched her for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences settling over him. He'd seen the cracks in her armor, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide, and it only made him admire her more. For the first time, he wondered if this island, despite its challenges, had given him something he hadn't realized he was searching for, someone who understood. The day started with a sense of renewed determination. After weeks of surviving on the island, Marissa and Guy had settled into a routine, finding food, maintaining their shelter, and watching the horizon for any signs of rescue. But today felt different. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, a faint, distant rumble broke the usual sounds of waves and wind. Guy froze, tilting his head toward the noise. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice tense with urgency. Marissa stopped what she was doing and listened. It took a moment, but then she heard it too, a faint but unmistakable drone. "A plane," she exclaimed, her eyes widening. Guy's heart raced as he scanned the sky, and then he saw it, a small speck moving across the endless blue. "There," he shouted, pointing. Without hesitation, they sprang into action. Guy grabbed a pile of dry wood and kindling they'd gathered earlier and began stacking it into a makeshift pyre. Marissa rushed to help, hauling branches and leaves to feed the fire. "We need as much smoke as possible," Guy said, his voice steady but urgent. "The bigger, the better." Marissa nodded, her hands trembling with adrenaline. She struck the flint they kept for emergencies, sparks flying until a small flame caught. Guy leaned in, carefully feeding the fire until it grew, sending a column of smoke curling into the sky. Come on," Marissa muttered, her eyes fixed on the plane. The two of them waved frantically, shouting at the top of their lungs as if the distant pilot could somehow hear them. The plane grew closer, its engine a low hum that reverberated through the air. For a moment it seemed like their prayers had been answered. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the plane began to veer off course, shrinking into the horizon. "No," Marissa whispered, her voice breaking. "No, no, no." She dropped to her knees, her hands clutching the sand as the reality of the situation sank in. "They didn't see us," she said, her tone flat with disbelief. Guy stood beside her, his fists clenched in frustration. "Maybe they'll circle back," he said, though even he knew the chances were slim. Marissa shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "We're never getting off this island, are we?" Her despair hit Guy like a punch to the gut. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "don't do that. Don't give up." "How can you be so calm?" Marissa snapped, her voice rising. "We just missed our only chance at rescue, and you're acting like everything's fine." "I'm not saying it's fine," Guy said firmly, "but we've been through worse. We survived the crash. We've built shelter, found food, made it this far. We can keep going. We just have to stay hopeful." "Hopeful?" Marissa repeated bitterly. "Hope doesn't change anything." "It does," Guy insisted, his tone unwavering. "It keeps you moving forward when everything else feels impossible. And right now, that's what we need, to keep moving forward." Marissa looked at him, her anger fading into exhaustion. She wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can," Guy said gently, "and you don't have to do it alone." His words hung in the air, and for the first time Marissa let herself feel the weight of his presence, the steady, unwavering support he had given her since the beginning. "You always know what to say," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "Not always," Guy replied with a small smile. "But I mean it, Marissa. You're stronger than you think." Something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made Marissa's defenses crumble. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I don't think I've ever felt safe before," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Not really. But with you I do." Guy's breath hitched, her words catching him off guard. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. "You're not alone, Marissa," he said quietly. "Not as long as I'm here." They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling softly beside them as the sun dipped lower in the sky. It wasn't the rescue they had hoped for, but in that moment it felt like they had found something equally important, a connection, a sense of solace in each other. As the night fell, Guy stoked the fire, ensuring it would last until morning. Marissa watched him, her heart heavy but steadied by his presence. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for survival, but for something more. The morning was calm, the waves gently lapping at the shore as sunlight streamed through the canopy of trees. Guy was walking along the beach, as he did every day, searching for anything useful the ocean might offer. Most days it was driftwood or bits of seaweed, nothing significant, but today was different. A glint of metal caught his eye near the waterline. Guy hurried over, brushing sand off the object. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was, a piece of the plane's communication panel. He examined it closely, his pulse quickening. Though damaged, the panel appeared to contain an intact transmitter. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to send a distress signal. "Marissa," Guy called, running back to their shelter. Marissa emerged, wiping her hands on her pants. "What is it?" she asked, her brow furrowing at his urgency. "Look," he said, holding up the panel. "It's from the plane. The transmitter's still here. If I can get it working, we might be able to signal for help." Marissa's eyes widened. "Do you think it'll work?" "I don't know," Guy admitted, "but it's worth a shot." For the next several hours, Guy worked tirelessly to repair the transmitter. Marissa stayed by his side, fetching tools from the survival kit, holding pieces steady, and offering encouragement when his frustration threatened to boil over. As the sun began to set, dark clouds rolled in, signaling an approaching storm. "This isn't good," Marissa said, glancing nervously at the sky. "I know," Guy replied, his hands moving quickly over the panel, "but I'm close. Just a little longer." The wind picked up, and rain began to fall in heavy drops. Marissa held a tarp over Guy, shielding the delicate equipment as best she could. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked, shouting to be heard over the rising wind. "No choice," Guy said grimly. "If we wait, the transmitter might get damaged beyond repair." As the storm intensified, Guy's fingers worked with precision, soldering wires and reconnecting circuits. Marissa watched him, marveling at his focus and determination despite the harsh conditions. "Almost there," Guy muttered, tightening a final screw. He flipped a switch, and the transmitter crackled to life. "It's on," Marissa exclaimed, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Guy grabbed the small microphone attached to the panel. "Mayday, mayday," he said, his voice steady. "This is Flight 319 requesting emergency assistance. Coordinates unknown. Do you copy?" For a moment there was only static. Then, faintly, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Flight 319, this is Coast Guard Command. We hear you. Hold your position. Assistance is en route." Marissa let out a laugh of pure joy, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Guy tightly. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling. Guy smiled, his exhaustion replaced by a wave of relief. "We did it," he corrected. Hours later, the sound of helicopter blades filled the air, cutting through the storm. A searchlight swept across the beach before locking onto their makeshift shelter. "They're here," Marissa shouted, waving her arms. The helicopter descended, and a team of rescuers emerged, guiding Guy and Marissa aboard. As they lifted off, Marissa stared down at the island that had been both their prison and their sanctuary. She turned to Guy, her expression soft. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for this, for everything. You saved me, Guy. More times than I can count." Guy met her gaze, his heart pounding. The words he'd been holding back for days suddenly felt impossible to contain. "Marissa," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I didn't just save you because it was my job. These past few weeks, being with you, surviving with you, it's changed me. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Marissa's breath caught as his words sank in. She didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. But her eyes, filled with gratitude and something deeper, told Guy all he needed to know. As the helicopter soared away from the island, Guy and Marissa sat side by side, their silence speaking volumes. In that moment, rescue was more than just leaving the island, it was finding something they hadn't known they were missing, each other. Life after the island was a whirlwind. Marissa returned to her high-powered world of boardrooms, contracts, and endless meetings, while Guy resumed his life as a pilot. Though they had escaped the island, they couldn't escape the memories of their time together, or the connection they had forged in the face of survival. For weeks, Marissa found herself thinking about Guy, his steady presence, his quiet courage, and the way he had shown her what it meant to truly rely on someone. Every time she sat in her corner office, or attended another corporate gala, she felt an ache for the simplicity and honesty of the island, and for the man who had shared that experience with her. Guy, too, couldn't get Marissa out of his mind. The image of her laughing by the fire, her vulnerability as she admitted her fears, and her resilience in learning to adapt stayed with him. The bustling airports and crowded skies felt strangely empty without her by his side. One day, Guy received an unexpected envelope in the mail. Inside was an elegant invitation to a gala hosted by Marissa's company. A handwritten note accompanied it. "Guy, I owe you more than I can ever say. Please join me so I can thank you properly. Marissa." The gala was a grand affair, held in a glittering ballroom filled with influential figures from the business world. Guy felt out of place in his borrowed suit as he walked through the crowd, but his nerves dissipated the moment he saw Marissa. She stood on the stage, radiant in a midnight blue gown, her confident demeanor captivating the room. When she spotted him, a genuine smile lit up her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marissa began, her voice carrying through the room, "tonight is about gratitude. Gratitude for my team, for our success, and for the people who make it all possible." She paused, her gaze locking on Guy. "But I also want to thank someone very special. Someone who saved my life, not just once, but in so many ways." The crowd murmured in curiosity as Marissa continued. "When I found myself stranded on a deserted island, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I discovered was far more important: strength, humility, and the understanding that sometimes it's okay to lean on someone else." Her voice softened, filled with emotion. "Guy didn't just save me from that island, he reminded me of who I am. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Applause filled the room as Marissa stepped off the stage and approached Guy. For a moment they stood there, the noise around them fading into the background. "Thank you for coming," Marissa said, her voice low. "I wouldn't miss it," Guy replied, his smile warm. After the gala, they found themselves on the balcony, away from the crowd. The city lights stretched out before them, but neither seemed to notice. "I meant every word I said up there," Marissa said, turning to face him. "You've changed my life, Guy." "You've changed mine too," Guy admitted. "I didn't expect any of this, not the crash, not the island, and definitely not meeting someone like you." Marissa smiled, her eyes shining. "So what do we do now?" Guy reached for her hand, his grip steady. "How about we figure it out together?" Marissa nodded, her heart full. "I'd like that." Their journey didn't end there, it was just the beginning. Marissa and Guy became partners in every sense of the word, their shared experiences shaping a new outlook on life. They traveled together, exploring the world with the same sense of wonder and resilience they had discovered on the island. One evening, as they stood on a quiet beach at sunset, the waves lapping at their feet, Marissa leaned into Guy, her head resting on his shoulder. "This feels right," she murmured. Guy smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "That's because it is." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, they stood there, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and extraordinary. Together, they had not only survived but found love, purpose, and the courage to embrace life's uncertainties hand in hand. As the sun sets on Marissa and Guy's incredible journey, we're reminded that life's most unexpected challenges often lead to the most profound discoveries about ourselves, about others, and about love. Their story is one of resilience, connection, and finding hope in the face of adversity. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you more tales of love, courage, and transformation that will inspire and warm your soul. Click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community of story lovers. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even in life's most uncertain moments, we can find strength, hope, and maybe even a little bit of magic. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep believing in the beauty of the human spirit.